So, the power of pause. What does this mean to me, and how does it connect to our field of embodied awakening? I feel, and perhaps you do as well, that just pausing from time to time throughout the day has wonderful benefits on all different levels. As I considered what I would say about what I think are the benefits of pausing, I remembered an expression that we often use, kind of sometimes literally, but often just more symbolically or metaphorically, and that expression of to stop to smell the roses. Now, we hear those expressions, but we don't always, we kind of sometimes a little bit gloss over them. And if we break that down a little bit, when we stop to smell the roses, we don't just stop. We do pause. We don't just pause, but we bring our attention to the present moment and sense what is there. Now, in this case with the roses, we put our attention to the roses, and we actually bring in their unique aroma. And even in our small city, one of our city parks has a rose garden. And I love it when the roses are in full bloom to go over there. And really, it's not just a chance to stop and smell the roses. That can be the purpose of that outing. And each one, though, I stop in front of each one and pause and take in its unique aroma. And of course, when I'm that close to it, I also bring in the visual beauty of the rose as well. But so that's just one way that pausing and turning our attention to something specific can bring great rewards on many, many different levels. Just the kind of sensual delight of being human in the case of smelling these roses, but also just that time of just letting the physiology perhaps settle down and be more focused. Now, there's some other common expressions about pausing that we use in everyday life. And one of them I've heard before, I've used it myself, is I need to center myself. We often say that when we feel kind of scattered, not very coherent. I need to center myself. And that is a kind of a pausing that we're doing. Another expression that we sometimes use is I need to shift gears. And, when we have a manual transmission car, when we actually do engage in shifting the gears, we push in the clutch to disengage the gears momentarily while we shift into another gear. So there's that pause actually of disengaging what's going on so that we can re-engage from a different point, a different perspective. So these ideas, stopping to smell the roses, centering myself, shifting gears, those are all very ordinary but significant ways that pausing can impact our life, often in positive ways. But I wanted to also spend some time today in talking about what's the value of pausing and furthering whole being realization. Now, to talk about how pausing impacts whole being realization, I will touch on several different points. Now, one thing that often people, when they describe their awakening or their awakenings, just shifts in awakening, is that they do often say there's a shift in identity. And prior to awakening, it's very common that we identify, our sense of self is identified with the field of change. And often our sense of identity is connected with roles and labels, changing roles and labels, and sometimes overlapping roles and labels. So for instance, some labels that roles that I might have taken on in my life would be daughter, sister, teen, student, wife, mother, employee, teacher, grandmother. So all of these are temporal, actually. Some of them overlapping. But they're shifts, they're ways that identify myself in the temporal changing world. There's nothing wrong with doing that. It's just that it's not a whole being realization. And I also find that when I have these identities that are shifting, temporal, changing, there's some of them that I might want to push away. Like even for me right now in my time of life, I find myself wanting to push away the label of crone. Some cultures don't push away the label of crone, but in the United States, we don't want to get old. That's a role that we push away. And so again, it's not exactly whole being realization if we're pushing some of who we are away. So, but still, we're bringing this back to awakening. And our awakening includes not just these roles of change, these temporal roles, but also includes the field, the unified field, the underlying field of non-change. Now, even when I say that word non-change, it kind of implies a stopping or a pausing. There's nothing moving. So it's not even like it is a stopping of, it's just like there is no movement. It is eternal pause, that field of non-change. There's nothing there to change. So I'm going to tie this back into the whole being realization, but I'm going to lay a little bit more foundational information first. So this Trillium path is a threefold path of whole being realization. The three petals of the path that we become so familiar with are consciousness, embodiment, and mutuality or relationship, relating to the whole field of change and the field of non-change. So in this whole being realization, first of all, we don't push away any of the field of change. We invite it, but at the same time, we invite what is often looked over, which is the field of non-change. So again, there's consciousness, which we might consider to be the field of non-change. There's embodiment, which is changing all of the time. It's the material world. And there's the relationship or mutuality between especially all of the parts of the material world, but also how the material world interfaces with the field of non-change. So again, right now in this particular exploration, we're going to consider a little bit more the petal of consciousness on this trillium flower, the petal of consciousness, while we explore this power of pause. Now, when we go to our orientation course, the Trillium orientation course, which Sanjay and I refer to a lot at the beginning of these sittings, there are a couple of points about consciousness that I will share with you now. Consciousness is the infinite, transcendent ground, which is always registering everything while remaining untouched and unbounded. I'll read that again. Consciousness is the infinite, transcendent ground, which is always registering everything while remaining untouched and unbounded. And then the next point, recognition of consciousness as transcendent to all is an essential element of whole being realization. Recognition of consciousness as transcendent, it could be an underlying, to transcendent to all is an essential element of whole being realization. So I want to bring in this word consciousness because here it is an essential element of whole being realization. And it can be a little bit hard for some people to relate to the word consciousness because it can feel very abstract. And so if it's easier for you to use the word awareness instead of consciousness, that is perfectly fine. For many, it's much easier. And it can make more sense just to use that word. So now we'll talk a little bit about consciousness. We'll use the word awareness. So when we become aware of something, we do this by turning our attention to it. Attention is simply focused awareness. So I'm making this a little more concrete. We went from a very abstract word, consciousness, the field of non-change, which may not feel so easy for us as humans to grasp, to awareness, which we know, to then focused awareness, which is attention. And we actually focus our awareness all the time. It's not that big a deal. We do this. Often when we focus our awareness, though, we do take a momentary pause. It's maybe just a fraction of a second as we turn our attention towards something specific to focus our awareness on it. Just again, remember, it can be as simple as stopping, pausing to smell the roses. You do have to pause and turn your attention to them. And then you can receive that moment of delight of smelling them. So now let's kind of wrap this back into awakening. We can also pause. We can turn our attention towards remembering who we are. outside of roles, outside of labels, who we are in our essential nature. One of my spiritual teachers would frequently remind his students, just it was kind of a command, he would just say, remember who you are. He might repeat it more than once, remember who you are. And like I said, it was like a command, and I found that my response to that command was to pause. It's like he said that when I was caught up in the field of change, like, remember who you are. I'd have to pause. I'd have to turn my attention within. Again, see, turning my attention, focusing my attention, bringing my awareness to who I am. And again, this is a shifting of my attention away from, this command was to shift it away from the external shifting roles of roles and labels. Remembering who we are. I've worked with other teachers that suggest that we transcend the field of change and expand to the field of non-change. And with that particular teacher especially, it was a meditation practice that I used. Not all of us are kind of wired for meditation practice. That would include a kind of long pause of maybe like setting aside your day for 15, 20 minutes or more. But I think all of us are capable of these short pauses, turning our attention to the present moment. In fact, a lot of spiritual paths also talk about awakening, referencing the word presence or presencing. It's hard to recognize the present moment without pausing to be it. So again, there's that pause again. So I hope you're beginning to kind of get a sense, maybe even a feeling sense, of how the power of pause and the suggestion of pausing that can include a redirection of attention. And it can be redirecting your attention to the outer world, but it can also be a pausing and redirecting your attention to the inner world and inviting the world, the awakened world, the world of whole being realization to be more manifest in that present moment. So I'd like to lead you in an exercise that includes some pausing. I'm going to put everyone, people are good, they are already on mute, it looks like, so that's great. And if it feels right to you in this pausing to close your eyes, go ahead and do that. Sometimes when we close our eyes, we can turn off some of the external environment that can be so compelling. It can make that pausing a little bit easier. And I invite you to also take a moment just to connect with your own breath. However you connect with your breath in this moment is the right way. The breath is always in the present moment. Invite a slowing down to your body's pace. Slowing down to the body's pace. And perhaps you notice that slowing down allows your awareness to rest into yourself. This is the pause that can make so much difference. Allowing our awareness to turn within. We can even sense in this moment, how are we? With our attention turned within, We can pause and sense for what feels alive, flowing, spacious. We can pause and sense for what inside feels like life energy, flowing inside of you. Take a moment to sense if you can find a ground, maybe just a ground of okayness that's inside as well. Or sometimes we call this fundamental wellness that's always there. Maybe it's subtle, but still there. Going back to our analogy of the roses have that smell whether we stop to smell them or not. That fundamental wellness is there, whether we pause to sense it or not. We can pause to find it. Sometimes it's like the smell of one rose may be more subtle than the other. At some time for us, this fundamental wellness may be more subtle, but it's there always. It's the ground of being. And that's one way that it can show up for us. It's an easy way to tap into it. Now, for some people, just simply setting aside some time, like you've all done today, to join a sitting, one that's either online or in person, you notice a feeling of safety, of being with like-minded people. And sometimes this sense of safety makes it easier to sense for that ground of wellness or that sense of okayness. To whatever degree you sense that right now, rest in it. Pause with it for just a bit. And it's of course okay if that sort of fundamental ground of being, of wellness of being, is there along with awareness of the present moment and change. The present moment includes the field of change. So there can be that deep ground of wellness, that fundamental wellness. And there might also be a place inside that needs some company. We'll be bringing this exercise to close in just a little bit. But before we do, I invite you to recall a time in your life when pausing was useful for you. Just any time when, oh, I stopped for a moment. Could have been in the last day or so. It could have been earlier in your life when you paused before you took action, especially. So just remember a time it was useful for you as a way of honoring the power of pause. And see if during this moment of pausing, if it feels just a little bit easier for you to take in the words, remember who you are, to take them in deeply. A remembering who you are. We'll bring this exercise to a close. I wanted to make a few closing remarks, and primarily to tie this back a little bit to part of the exercise. And so on 2 points, I want to bring up the word, a little bit about consciousness, and then also a little bit about this fundamental wellness, ground of wellness that we've been talking about as well. So again, consciousness, if it's a word that means a lot to you, words like absolute and consciousness and groundlessness and field of non-change are easy for you to relate to, absolutely relate to them. But for those of you that you just want to throw that word consciousness in the cosmic trash can, or even you're just only your own little personal trash can, please go ahead and do that. But don't throw away the concept, and more importantly, the direct experience of just what we call fundamental wellness, or just okayness. That can feel like a constant that we can connect to, perhaps, where consciousness feels like something for many of us, I can't connect to that. It's too abstract, or it's too outside of me. But wellness, we can pause and we can invite that sense of wellness, even if it's just like that little corner that's way kind of out there. Bringing our attention to it will help cultivate it and help it not be completely overcome by the field of change. So I do want to invite all of you from time to time to not just pause and smell the roses, but pause to bring your attention to that field that lies. And if the words aren't quite right for you, find your own words, but something that's inside that just feels okay, despite all of the change and the chaos that might be happening as well. And we can I remember once, it was Hillary, one of our Trillium teachers, said, can you just lay your head on that sense of okayness? That gently there's something inside that's okay. And I can just rest on it and let it hold me, even if it feels like it's rather small and shaky at the moment. By getting to know it better, it grows stronger in your life and it becomes more accessible to you.